It was a quiet Saturday evening, and I was alone in my room. Alex, my closest friend in the neighborhood, had gone out with some other friends for the weekend, leaving me with the house to myself. I wasn't particularly used to this level of stillness, but I welcomed it. The air was calm, the sun had begun its slow descent, and everything seemed peaceful. I had barely settled into the quiet when I heard a soft knock at my door. For a moment, I wondered if I had imagined it. But then there was again more deliberate this time. I stood up, a little hesitant but curious, and opened the door to find Sophia, Alex's mom, standing there with a warm smile. "Hi," she said, holding a small plate of cookies. "I was baking earlier, and thought you might want some." I thanked her and invited her inside. Sophia was always kind, and there was something about her presence that made people feel at ease. She stepped into the room and glanced around casually. Her demeanor was relaxed, almost as if this were a completely normal visit. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything," she said, placing the plate on the desk. "Not at all," I replied. "I was just passing the time." She took a seat on the chair near the window, folding her hands in her lap. The sunlight hit her face in a way that highlighted her elegant features. It was no secret that Sophia was striking, but she carried herself with such grace that it felt effortless. We started talking about random things at first, small talk about the weather, her day, and a few updates about Alex. But as the conversation went on, it grew more personal. She asked me about my life, how I was adjusting to the new town, and what I thought of the neighborhood. I shared a little about myself, carefully keeping things light. Sophia listened intently, nodding and occasionally chiming in with encouraging words. There was something comforting about her attention, like she genuinely cared about what I had to say. At one point, she laughed at a small joke I made. Her laugh was soft but infectious, and for a brief moment, I forgot about the oddity of the situation. "You're a good listener," she said suddenly, her tone more serious now. "Alex is lucky to have a friend like you." I felt a slight warmth in my chest at her words, but quickly brushed it off. "I'm the lucky one," I said. She smiled again, but this time there was a flicker of something in her eyes, something I couldn't quite place. It wasn't uncomfortable, but it was enough to make me feel a slight shift in the air. Before I could dwell on it, she stood up, brushing invisible crumbs off her hands. "I should let you enjoy your evening," she said, her tone light again. "Thank you for letting me stop by." As I walked her to the door, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to her visit than she had let on. But I convinced myself it was nothing. After all, she was just being kind, right? After Sophia left, I sat for a while, trying to focus on a book I'd been meaning to read. But her visit lingered in my mind, the way her words carried a weight I couldn't quite decipher. It felt harmless, yet something about it refused to settle. An hour later, there was another knock at the door. This time, I opened it to find her standing there again, holding a cup of tea. "I realized I didn't ask how you take your tea," she said, her tone casual, though her eyes seemed to search mine for something unspoken. I smiled awkwardly and gestured for her to come in. She placed the cup on the desk and sat down once more, this time looking a little more at ease, as if she had made up her mind about something. We started talking again, but this time, the conversation took a different turn. She asked me about my family, my aspirations, and even my fears. Her questions were thoughtful, not prying, but they carried a sense of curiosity that felt deeper than surface-level interest. As I spoke, I noticed how intently she listened. Her gaze never wavered, her posture relaxed but attentive. She nodded at the right moments, occasionally offering a soft smile or a word of encouragement. It was disarming, this level of attention, and I found myself opening up more than I usually would. "You have a good head on your shoulders," she said at one point, her voice warm. "You're going to do great things." "I can feel it." Her words felt genuine, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel the comfort they brought. It wasn't often that someone spoke to me like this, with such belief and conviction. As the evenings stretched on, the atmosphere in the room shifted subtly. The pauses between our words grew longer, but they weren't uncomfortable. They felt charged, though I couldn't quite put my finger on why. At one point, Sophia reached out to adjust a stray thread on my sleeve. It was such a small gesture, but the way her fingers brushed against my arm made my breath catch. I quickly looked away, pretending not to notice, but my heart was beating faster now. "I hope I'm not keeping you," she said softly, her eyes searching mine. "Not at all," I replied, though my voice sounded slightly strained even to me. Her smile returned, but this time it held something different, something that made me feel both drawn to her and wary at the same time. As the clock ticked on, she finally stood, brushing her hands on her jeans as if shaking off the weight of the moment. "I should go," she said, her voice softer now. "Thank you for indulging me. I didn't mean to take up so much of your time." She lingered for a moment at the door, her eyes meeting mine one last time before she left. And just like that, the room felt heavier, the echoes of our conversation lingering in the silence. The quiet of the night had settled in, and I was finally beginning to focus on something else when I heard a knock at the door again. For a moment, I debated ignoring it, but curiosity won out, and I opened the door to find Sophia standing there once more. This time, she didn't have an excuse. She just looked at me, her expression soft but unreadable. "I couldn't sleep," she admitted, almost as if she were confessing something. "I just needed someone to talk to." I hesitated but stepped aside, letting her in. Her presence felt heavier now, like she carried more than just her words with her. She sat down again, quieter this time, her eyes fixed on the floor, as if trying to gather her thoughts. "I don't want you to think this is strange," she began, her voice low. "It's just sometimes it feels like no one really listens, you know? Like you're invisible, even in your own home." I nodded, unsure of how to respond. There was a rawness in her tone that made me uncomfortable, not because it was unwelcome, but because it felt too intimate, too close to something I wasn't sure I was ready for. "I see how you listen," she continued, glancing up at me now. "You pay attention. It's rare to find that." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, the tension in the room palpable. She shifted slightly, her hand brushing against mine as she adjusted her position. It wasn't a deliberate touch, but it lingered just a fraction of a second longer than it should have. I pulled my hand back instinctively, the gesture small but noticeable. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, her eyes wide with something that looked like regret, or maybe fear. "I didn't mean to make you uncomfortable." "You didn't," I lied, my voice steadier than I felt. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. "This was a mistake," she muttered, more to herself than to me. But she didn't move to leave. Instead, she looked at me again, her eyes searching mine for something I couldn't name. "I don't know why I came back here tonight," she said softly. "Maybe I just needed to feel like someone cared." Her words hit me harder than I expected, and before I could stop myself, I reached out, placing a hand on hers. "You're not invisible," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, we just sat there, the silence between us filled with a weight I didn't know how to carry. Then, as if realizing what was happening, she pulled her hand away and stood up abruptly. "I should go," she said again, but this time her voice was firmer, almost as if she were trying to convince herself. I didn't stop her. I couldn't. As she walked out the door, I was left sitting there, my hand still tingling from where hers had been, the echoes of her words looping in my mind. The next few days felt like a blur. I avoided going outside, kept the curtains drawn, and ignored my phone whenever Alex texted to ask how I was doing. Guilt hung over me like a cloud, growing heavier with each passing hour. I couldn't stop replaying everything in my head, the looks, the words, the moments that shouldn't have happened. Every time I tried to rationalize it, I hit the same wall. Nothing had happened, not really. But the lines had blurred in ways they shouldn't have, and that alone was enough to make me feel like I had betrayed Alex's trust. By the third day, Alex showed up at my door unannounced. His usual easygoing demeanor was replaced with a look of concern as he stepped inside. "You've been weird lately," he said, crossing his arms. "What's going on? Did something happen?" I shook my head quickly, forcing a smile that felt hollow. "I'm fine, just been caught up with stuff." He didn't look convinced. "You're not a great liar, you know that?" I shrugged, avoiding his gaze. I just need some time, that's all. He sighed but didn't push further. Instead, he stayed for a while, talking about random things, filling the silence with stories about his weekend and plans for the coming week. I nodded along, trying to act normal, but my mind was elsewhere. Every time he mentioned his mom, I felt my chest tighten, the guilt twisting deeper. After he left, I thought about telling him everything. Maybe the truth would set things right. But I knew it wasn't that simple. There was too much at stake: his trust, his friendship, and the unspoken bond we'd built. That evening, I found myself staring at my phone, scrolling aimlessly until a message appeared. It was from Sophia. Just a short, simple text: "I hope you're okay." I stared at it for what felt like an eternity, unsure how to respond, or if I even should. Her words felt like they carried more than concern, like they were meant to remind me of everything we hadn't said out loud. In the end, I didn't reply. Instead, I deleted the message and set my phone aside, trying to bury the feelings that had begun to surface again. The days that followed were quieter, but the silence wasn't comforting. It felt heavy, filled with everything that had been left unsaid and unresolved. I saw Sophia in passing a few times, but we didn't speak. She would give me a small nod or a fleeting glance, and then she'd move on, as if nothing had happened. But every time, I could feel the weight of her presence, the unspoken connection that lingered between us. As time went on, I learned to live with the guilt, though it never truly went away. It served as a constant reminder of how easily lines could blur and how important it was to keep boundaries intact. Looking back, I realized it wasn't just about what happened, it was about what could have happened and the consequences that might have followed. And that was a lesson I wouldn't forget.